guys, and welcome to a special segment of the Human Echoes podcast. You know that right now we're smack dab in the middle of our Mockbuster month, and one of the biggest names in Mockbuster is the Asylum. And one of the biggest names from the Asylum, and somebody you've heard me talk about, whether it's in some of my other videos or in the podcast, Thunder Levin, writer of the Sharknado movies, writer and director of American Battleships, and, no, they made you rename that. I'm sorry, American Warships, and Apocalypse Earth is here to talk to us. Welcome aboard to the Human Echoes podcast, Thunder Levin. I'm so excited. I'm just so excited to talk to you. You're a huge...
Well, thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. So I guess people who might be tuning into this probably know that Sharknado 4 is coming. You mentioned to us beforehand that you are not at liberty to talk about much of that, but I guess most people who know you from the Sharknado movies. So let's start with that. How did you get involved with Sharknado, and how did you get involved with the Asylum, more importantly? Because that's really what I'm interested in, is what was your entry point with them, and how did you get sort of sucked into that wonderful, weird family?
Sucked in is a very good word. I had actually known David Latt, who's one of the partners at the Asylum, for many years through a mutual friend. And we had talked about some other projects this was years ago, before Asylum even got started. We had talked about projects. And then the Asylum, it started out as an art house distributor, oddly enough. They weren't making these mockbusters and such. And I talked to him once then, but I think in fact he never really took me seriously as a filmmaker at that point, because I hadn't really done anything, beyond student films and such. And so many years passed, and I would check in with him from time to time. And finally, I was getting frustrated with the Hollywood runaround, and getting deals that would almost get made and then fall apart at the last minute, and people telling me, "Hey, we like your script, but it needs to be completely rewritten," and things of that nature. And so after many years of that, I decided to raise some money from private investors and make my own film. And so I made a little film called Mutant Vampire Zombies from the Hood, which starred C. Thomas Howell. And that was a great experience, and it went really well. And for what it was, the film turned out pretty good. And so when it was done, I showed it to my old friend David Latt and said, "Here, see, I can do what I've been saying I could do for years and years." And he couldn't really deny that anymore. And so they hired me to write a movie. I thought actually I was being hired to write and direct a movie called 200 Miles Per Hour, which was a car racing movie. It was kind of a mockbuster of Fast and the Furious 5. And so I went in for my meeting after we'd been talking about the story for a while, and I was talking about my plans for directing it, and they all sort of got this awkward look on their faces. And they said, "Well, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. We already have a director. We just want you to write it." And so that was disappointing, but still I had fun writing that script, and ended up having to write it in 10 days, which I had never done anything even remotely close to that. And so that went well, and so they decided that the next one I would direct, and that was American Warships. And so that's how I got in with them.
I gotta say, I know people may not be as familiar with American Warships as some of the other stuff the Asylum has put out, but I really respect the films that you've directed, because you bring a really great groundedness to those movies, to the point where I almost think as a director, you may not be a great fit with the Asylum. I was telling Tony, your movie Apocalypse Earth, if you gave that $100 million budget and basically kept everything else the same, but could really amp up the effects and sort of the things the way they need to be told, that would be a great sci-fi adventure story. There's not a lot there that you're like, this movie's just, it's got its fun, dumb moments. I mean, the dragon carrying around the android, but it's not it's not stupid. It takes itself seriously, as you know. And I guess one of the things I kind of wonder is, do you think sometimes if you weren't, especially Sharknado, I mean, if it was just American Warships, if it was just, Apocalypse Earth, maybe wouldn't be such a big deal. But your name is very publicly linked now with these Sharknado films. Does that limit your possibilities elsewhere in Hollywood? Do you think that you maybe would like to do other stuff, but are you worried that that might hurt you from being taken seriously?
Well, there are a whole bunch of different questions in there. Um, the first one is thank you very much, because that's how I feel about both my Asylum films. Um, I went into American Warships with sort of the personal mission that if this wasn't the best film the Asylum had ever made, I was doing something wrong. And one would hope that every director goes in, with that intent. But I was not, and continue to not be the least bit interested in making mockbusters or making intentionally bad movies. And that's an argument we can have about Sharknado too. But I think what you said about AE with the budget, I actually feel that way even more strongly about American Warships, because that's a film where I'm very proud of the work we did on set. The stuff I did with Mario Van Peebles and Carl Weathers, I thought that was all. I'm very proud of that. And then we were let down to a certain extent by the visual effects.
The visual effects in that one are kind of rough. You're
Yeah.
not wrong.
And not because the guys at the Asylum aren't good, but because they were trying to do the equivalent of a $200 million film in 3 weeks with 10 people, what would normally be done in 6 months with several hundred people. So I don't blame them at all. It's just a fact of life there. And because it was my first Asylum film, I went into it not really knowing what they were and were not capable of. And so a lot of that film depended on a lot of story material, really, being conveyed in the visual effects shots. And so that ended up being a weak link. So I think American Warships, if we had a bigger budget, would have been a perfectly happy studio-level film. And in fact, that was a mockbuster of Battleship. And I will put that film up story point for story point, and character for character and performance for performance against Battleship. And I would say that in every way except production value, our film is better. I mean, Battleship was, let's face it, was not a great movie.
I haven't seen it yet. I've seen your movie, American Warships, at least 3 or 4 times. Not counting, I assume that you know this, but I guess I should say it out that I'm the guy who does this Albert versus the Asylum series on YouTube. Not a ton of people watch it, but I really love the Asylum, and I love kind of making fun of them, but I respect a lot what they're trying to do. And so in that some of the stuff I was watching frame by frame a little bit occasionally when I was editing, but American Warships I've seen often enough where it's definitely, again, like you said, and I guess because of the special effects, especially when they're on that boat, man, that it falls a little bit apart when the SEALs are going over to the alien ship.
Alien ship, yeah.
But in spite of those things, you're right. Like it's a compelling story. It's an interesting take, and it's a cool alien invasion thing. It's sort of the small scale, not too small, but it's just the one alien ship showing up, and then our guys have to fight them off. They're sort of an advanced scout. Excuse me.
Yeah.
It's a very you write very standard sci-fi stuff, except, and I will say, when you get, I think when you get into Sharknado, you maybe let that slide a little bit, or either that or they're really butchering your scripts.
No. Sharknado's a whole different beast. So after American Warships, when I did AE, after feeling a little burned by the visual effects, I designed AE from the beginning. Actually, AE Apocalypse Earth. When I was making it, it was just called AE, which I thought was very mysterious. And people would always ask me, what does the AE stand for? And I'd say almost everything. But yeah, so I designed that movie to not need, the same level of visual effects. I tried to keep it much simpler. And so I'm also very proud of that film, and that is the movie that kept me from directing Sharknado, or at least contributed to me not directing Sharknado, because originally I was attached to direct Sharknado as well. But then they were both being shot at the same time, and I chose AE because I'd already done one, tongue-in-cheek disaster film with my zombie film. And so I wanted to try something a bit more heartfelt and a bit more serious. And so I was off in the jungles of Costa Rica having a great time while Anthony Ferrante was here in L.A. Trying to shoot a movie about tornadoes and hurricanes in a 2-week stretch that had no rain or clouds whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a problem in those movies as well.
Yeah.
By the way, again, not to sort of harp on these same points, but you really, one of the things that a director can for sure do, I mean, you may not have control over all the special effects and stuff, but in Apocalypse Earth, and you mentioned the performances in American Warships, but Apocalypse Earth has some really grounded performances as well, and especially the camo girl whose name I've forgotten. I want to say Leela, but I don't think that's right. She's just like a model, right? But she gives a really good, not a complicated performance, but you got something out of her that doesn't feel like cheeseball crap. It feels like, okay, this is decent sci-fi action acting.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. She was a model. She was the most famous model in Costa Rica at the time. And she'd done a lot of international modeling, but she really hadn't done any acting. And we had to cast that part locally. The only Americans that the Asylum would bring down were Adrian Paul and Richard Grieco. So we had to cast the rest of the film locally. And trying to find someone to play her was the big challenge. And we were getting close to having to start shooting, and we had one actress who was a bit old for the part and not as pretty as I would have liked, but who was a pretty good actress. And then we had one who was the right age and very attractive, but she couldn't act. And we were all getting kind of nervous that we weren't going to find who we needed for the female lead for the film. And then all our formal auditions had actually been wrapped up, and we got a call from our local casting director saying, "Hey, there's this model who's trying to get into acting, and you should see her." And so she actually came to our hotel, and she brought her mom with her to the audition because I think she was a little nervous about coming to these strangers' hotel. And we couldn't find a place to audition, and finally they let us into the hotel gym. And so she was doing her audition in the midst of all this workout equipment, and she just blew us away. I mean, she just really nailed her audition, and she certainly had the look, and she was certainly poised and just physically, because she was a model, she was just very aware of what she was doing with her body, which was important for this character who would have lived her whole life in the jungle and had to be sort of very at one with her environment and move with a sort of cat-like stealth. And so she gave a great audition, but then the shoots are so fast that I really didn't have a lot of time to work with her. And I didn't, we were moving so fast, and she was losing so much time in makeup because, she was in head-to-toe body paint,
right.
that caused certain problems too, and we actually lost her for most of the first day of the shoot, and that set us behind schedule and made everything a little tense. And so I didn't really get to work with her on her performance as much as I would have liked, but she still managed to do a very good job, I thought. And the fact that she didn't have a clearly Costa Rican accent because she traveled all over the world, so her accent was not the same as the other people we were auditioning, but at the same time, you could tell she wasn't a native English speaker. That worked perfectly for her character. So it all sort of came together there. I had actually originally intended to have Johanna Watts, who was in American Warships, played the lieutenant. I had originally written the role for her because she and I are friends, and she actually helped me develop the story a bit. But then when the time came, she wasn't able to go down to Costa Rica on her own dime, and the Asylum wouldn't pay for her because she's not a name, and so we had to cast locally, and it all worked out.
I gotta say, by the way, she's a name to me. I know. You see her in American Warships, and I looked her up. I was like, who is that? And
Yeah,
she's in just a shout out to Johanna Watts. Has some new things going on now. I think she has a movie called Working Girl that's shopping around at some festivals.
Career Girl. Career
Career
Girl.
Girl. Thank
It's
you.
a short though. It's not a feature, and
Oh well, that
it's
shows how much I know. I
yeah,
follow her
but
on Twitter. I'm not like personally, real
it's
familiar.
actually a great short film, and it's been winning a lot of festivals. And she wrote it and stars in it, and really she co-directed it, although she didn't take credit for that. Probably should have. And it's a wonderful little film, and I hope it leads to big things for her, and I hope to keep working with her. There's almost always a part in each of my stories for her. In fact, she was the one. If I had directed Sharknado, she would have played Nova, because I wrote that part with her in mind. So
I do gotta say, Cassie Sherbo brings I really enjoy Cassie Sherbo in that part. I think she might be the best parts of those films when she's in them. I love when she shows back up in 3. That girl has some presence.
Yes, she does, and there's an argument to be made that Nova is in some ways the best character in that film. I mean, Finn is a great hero, and it was a lot of fun just writing this pure hero Boy Scout kind of character. But Nova, yeah, Nova's kind of special.
I wanted to go back. You mentioned you got to go to Colombia for AE. Costa Rica. I'm sorry.
Costa Rica.
I knew there was a C in there somewhere.
Beautiful,
But
beautiful country. Terrible place to make movies.
I was actually surprised by that. When I watched that movie, I kind of was thinking you were in some like botanical garden or something, that because you have all these sort of obviously outlandish, out there looking plants. But the Asylum actually puts you down on location to do that?
Yeah, that was great. I mean, the Asylum likes to try different locations. The thing is, you have to be able to hire most of your cast and crew locally, because they won't pay for you to send a whole bunch of people. Basically, it's the director, the producer, the cinematographer, and then at most 2 others. So maybe your makeup person or your production designer.
So all of your actors were from there, or did you have a name? What I didn't really know anybody. At least nobody who I saw in the movie seemed like a big name to me. But were all of the people that you had in the film, or at least all the smaller parts, hired from there and around Costa Rica?
Well, obviously Adrian Paul and Richard Grieco were not.
Okay.
In fact, there's an interesting story. I was driving with the location scout, who really was just a tour guide that we hired to be our location scout, because there are no location scouts in Costa Rica, or maybe there's one, and they were working on what was shooting there at the same time. I don't remember.
Something with more money.
Yeah, something with a lot more money. And so anyway, we were driving down from the big city San Jose to the place on the coast where we were going to shoot. And he said, "So who's going to be in this movie?" And I said, "Well, Adrian Paul." And he says, "I don't know who that is." And I said, "Well, you remember a few years back there was this TV series called Highlander?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, this is the Highlander." And he looks at me with this dumbfounded expression. His jaw drops open. And he says, "Adrian Paul is what was it? Duncan MacLeod is coming here?" And he was just stunned. Yeah. So yeah, Adrian Paul and Richard Grieco, obviously the Asylum paid to send down. And then there were 2 American actors who had both been in American Warships, Gray Hawkes and Jay Cardell, who flew down on their own dime, actually, and worked as local hires, and because that was the only way we had to cast locally. And I said, I'd love to have you guys in this movie, but they're not going to pay for you to come down, and they volunteered to come down on their own dime.
That's one thing I love about watching the Asylum movies is that there are faces that pop up in not necessarily all of them, but many, many of them. And kind of, we started off talking about how there's, sort of suck you into their family, but it really does seem like that there's a cast of people that are just sort of always around, and then you have occasionally people wander in and wander out. But there are several faces that you'll see.
Yes, there are. Yeah.
In these films.
One of them is Gerald Webb, who you'll see in about half of the Asylum movies, I think, because he was the casting director for years, and he always put himself in their films. There are a lot of familiar faces that they keep bringing back once they get somebody. It's a difficult working environment when you have to move that fast and you have so little money. So anyone who can do that, who can sort of be a team player and isn't going to be a prima donna and is going to work hard despite the conditions, and be able to deliver a performance under those circumstances, they're going to keep bringing them back. And it makes perfect sense.
There's something, we just actually reviewed Sharknado 3 for our podcast last week. And
I hope you were kind.
I enjoyed it. Tony's not so much.
I'm not the biggest
mockbuster stuff.
I'm not the biggest like schlock fan or like the mockbuster type fan, but Al has actually got me to the point where like I used to hate them, and now I can actually start seeing the things that he really likes about them, and I just take it a lot less seriously and kind of it's more of a ride for me than it used to be. So I've found the ways that I can like them. There were parts that like that just had me shaking my head a little bit, but I like your use of Mark Cuban as the president. Like there was some really awesome stuff in that. So I enjoyed it more than I expected it, and I like I said, it's not my type of movie, but I had fun with that one. Same with like Abraham Lincoln versus Zombies and some of these others that have been put out recently.
Right. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln versus Zombies was pretty good. The Mark Cuban thing was I thought a high point of that film. I was very excited. The night we shot that, I was on set that night, and to hear him, and he does come off as presidential. He, as Donald Trump is showing, Mark Cuban could certainly be president, and so it felt very real on set. And when he started introducing Finn, and I thought about how far Finn as a character had come in the last 2 years, and then I thought about how far all of us, as filmmakers, and this bizarre wild ride we've been on with Sharknado, how far we've all come in the last 2 years, and it was all sort of culminated in that introduction, and it just sent chills down my spine just watching the first take on set.
I gotta say, while I love the Asylum, up until Sharknado 3, I did not love those movies. I always kind of felt like they didn't quite get where I wanted to go. But there's something different about 3. And I can this is the way I feel as a viewer. It seems to me like y'all, and I know that stop taking yourself seriously sounds like a dumb thing to say about the Sharknado films, but 3 feels like the one where you finally just kind of threw off the chains and you're like, you know what? People are watching these. We're going to get crazy with this Sharknado idea. Is there any am I way off base in feeling that way about 3, or does that have a little bit of validity from where you're standing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I felt like the second one, I feel like the second one is the best of the 3. Personally, I think it's the one where we came closest to capturing the intent of the script. And I felt like the second one was what the fans were trying to make the first one be. The third one, maybe it's just my ego talking, but in the third one, maybe you're right. Maybe we were doing more crazy stuff, and it was a little less character and plot oriented.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot or like get
I
you to
don't know.
talk down
The
your
second
movies.
the second one is my favorite of the three, but there are things I love in all of them. And there was certainly a lot of fun, great moments we had in the third one, and you may be right that it was a case of, well, let's just do everything we can, and there was stuff that got into the third one that was supposed to be in the second one and didn't make it in, and so there was an opportunity to do that. We've still never done the scene I've been trying to get in since the first movie, which is Finn surfing down a street in a city. Originally, it was just going to be Finn surfing down Wilshire Boulevard in L.A. in the first one. And then in the second one, we were going to have him surfing down Fifth Avenue in an upturned hot dog cart umbrella. And I was just really excited about that, and then that never happened. And so then finally we sort of did a pale version of it in the third one, where Mark McGrath surfs down the stairs on the paintings in the White House, and so we finally sort of got that moment in. Yeah, and there are moments in the third movie that I absolutely love. Especially at the end where he's falling in the shark and he punches a hole in it and sticks his parachute out. I mean, that's my favorite moment in that whole movie.
Oh, really? I think for me it's that first moment when Cassie Sherbo shows up again and like kind of upstages Finn with her like Semper Paratus thing, where he's like always, and she's like, "No, I'm prepared. All right."
Right.
You're driving around in a little dinky foreign car or something. I've got the goods.
Well, he was in a rental, so what do you expect of him? But it's funny because I'm actually a little disappointed by that moment, because I wanted to do a cheesy line there when she first shows up, and Anthony changed it so that she just says, "Hi, Finn," or something. And I wanted her to open the door, reach out her hand to him, and say, "Come with me if you want to live." And Anthony vetoed that idea. So, that moment, that moment I always wanted to be even bigger than it was. But yeah, her first appearance, Anthony and I talked about that, about how she'd appear out of the fog and suddenly reveal who she was, and that was a good moment, because I think she was missed in the second one, and I was so glad we were able to bring her back.
From what I can tell from IMDb, she's not going to be in the fourth one, which I'm a little bit sad about, but...
Yeah.
Oh, and I know you can't say much, but I was going to say, you said, you kind of threw everything at the screen for... Go ahead.
Come back to me after the fourth one is released, and we'll talk about Nova and the fourth one.
Well, I did want to say, in general, you mentioned you kind of threw everything at the screen in the third one. Is there still stuff left to throw at the screen in 4?
Not only is there stuff left to throw at the screen, but there was a lot of stuff we wanted to do that we weren't even able to do. I actually have a story arc for 5 through 7, and we have to see if Sci-Fi will approve my story arc. Because, if people keep watching, we'll keep making them, I think.
Well, I will keep watching. And by the way, I know you don't have any say over this, but I tell everybody who is even remotely linked to the Asylum that I get a chance to, if you see David Michael Watt, tell him we want more Mega Shark movies too. I know they're not as big as Sharknado, but that is my jam, and I was disappointed by Mega Shark vs. Colossus, but Mega Shark vs. Mecha Shark, in my mind, is maybe the high point of everything in the Asylum. I love that giant shark rolling around on them stupid tank treads, and I would love to see that come back. Plus, they're doing a film with Jason Statham called Meg. They're adapting the ultimate giant shark movie. They gotta come back with another Mega Shark mockbuster.
I just met John Turteltaub, who's directing that, just last weekend.
That's a seminal book. I don't want to get off on it, but that is huge in my mind as far as getting me turned on to the sharksploitation giant shark thing. Yeah,
I love that book, and we were trading fish stories about making shark movies.
Well, I think cool. I think that'll. Tony, do you have anything you wanted to ask? I as usual, I talk and you don't get to say much. Did you have anything you wanted to ask our guest?
I don't think so. I think we covered. You actually asked some of the questions that I had written down. The only thing I was kind of curious about is what's it like whenever like Sharknado 3 actually comes out or any of these and it hits sci-fi, and you see that it actually is becoming kind of an event with each progressive movie. Like that's got to be really
Yeah.
cool in an era where it's like just Netflix binging and people are kind of out of sync and people are actually like tuning in to watch this live and actually talk about it and just be all over the place. Like compared to some of the other
Well,
stuff you've
actually,
worked on. Sorry, go ahead.
I have done a couple of public speaking appearances, and I have a whole speech about that, about how, you know, from the beginning of time, from not beginning of time, from the beginning of human history, from Neanderthals sitting around a campfire to the ancient Greek plays, to Shakespeare, to, I don't know, everybody having to watch The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson a generation ago. There have been these communal storytelling that provides a common language for our society, and it's what holds our society together. And as the way we consume media has fractured, you know, with everybody watching things at different times, where they want, when they want, we're sort of losing that communal shared language. So in fact, Sharknado has saved civilization as we know it, because it brings people together at the same time watching the same thing and letting them talk about it. Yes, it's been an incredible ride. It's amazing and awesome. And that first night when the first movie blew up on Twitter, it was just the most surreal experience of my life. And the fact that it's become this annual event is a remarkable and wonderful thing, and I hope it keeps on going, and I hope people keep tuning in, and I hope it continues to be this event. You know, every year for about 3 or 4 weeks in July, all of a sudden I'm a famous person, and people are interviewing me, and we're, you know, going to Comic-Con and stuff, and it's just wonderful. It's such a blast, and the fact that people have so much fun with it is just remarkably rewarding, and it's just wonderful. And the way kids take to it, because kids don't watch Sharknado ironically. They're just in it. They're just enjoying it for the adventure and the fun, and it's just great to see.
Well, Thunder Levin, you're always a famous person to me, and I always look forward to what you're doing next. I hope the Asylum lets you direct some more stuff, and you get to keep working on Sharknado. That's not something I got to ask. Do you have projects coming up beyond Sharknado 4?
Yeah, actually, we didn't talk about that. I have another Sci-Fi Channel movie that's lined up. We haven't signed the contracts yet, so I can't really talk about it, but I should be writing that pretty soon, and that would come out, I guess, in the fall of 2017. I've got 2 TV series that I'm pitching to the networks right now. One is sort of Sharknado-esque. It's this big, crazy, you know, tongue-in-cheek sci-fi adventure. And then one is a very dark, serious, apocalyptic kind of show. And I need to go in and actually have a meeting with the Asylum and talk about directing something else for them, possibly. And I've got an independent feature that I'm developing and hoping to find money for. So a bunch of things going on, and not all, you know, tongue-in-cheek like Sharknado. Because yeah, I mean, I would like to keep doing Sharknado and have that be my wacky outlet, and then do other more serious things around it. And also, I think that's a model for sci-fi. You know, sci-fi as a network is trying to rebrand itself. They're trying to get back to more serious stuff. And having Sharknado as sort of the annual exception to that, the celebration of the B movie, I think still works and fits into their brand. So
I'm okay with both things. You know, we can have The Expanse and we can have Z Nation. Let's
Right.
not feel like we have to pigeonhole. I really love Z Nation. That's a whole. I mean, I know that this is
Yeah, I
Asylum.
love that too. In fact, I was hoping to direct for them this year, and it didn't work out. So I'm hoping Carl Schaefer will bring me on board if there's a fourth season.
Well, that'll be awesome. Thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us, sir. It's been a
My pleasure.
legitimate honor, and yeah, looking forward to Sharknado 4. Hope it's awesome, and good luck with everything that you're working on, man.
Okay, thanks a lot.